Hey guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Joshua Halstead.
My name is Michael Halstead.
And we're going to be doing a new thing, kind of roundtable-ish. And what we're going to do is, this week we're going to talk specifically about the sci-fi genre. So we're going to do 3 different videos on sci-fi, covering at first 4 decades, and then after that we're going to do 2 more videos, each covering 3 decades, going through our favorite films in the sci-fi genre by decade. So today we're going to cover the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. So starting with the 20s, do you want to talk about what was in your favorites for the 20s?
I do, but first there's one problem.
What?
This can't be a roundtable discussion. We have no table.
Okay then. Technically, round tables.
Okay, that's a stool.
Fine, a round stool discussion.
Alright, 1920s, I have as my top film, Metropolis from 1927, and obviously I think that the 2010 restoration is the best cut of that film. It's the closest to what was originally intended. We don't have the entire film. Lots of that was corrupted, but they've been able to restore large amounts of that film through archive footage and just kind of recompiling everything after they've restored the old film. So that's going to be the closest thing you can get to the original Fritz Lang masterpiece that we can find, and it's absolutely astonishing. Any form of that film is, but just the 2010 restoration in general is one of my favorite science fiction films, and especially the 1920s is my favorite.
And for me, I definitely have Metropolis as my number 1. I think you have a second one on yours. I just solely put Metropolis. I think not only is it the best from the 20s, it's one of the top 2 or 3 best sci-fi films ever made. I think definitely one of the most prolific ever made. I have lots of notes on it that I'm not going to go through all of them, but I mean, first of all, Fritz Lang is just an incredible director.
Oh yeah.
Everything. I mean, talking about masterpiece for Metropolis as far as sci-fi, masterpiece for noir with his work on M and some of his stuff.
Oh yeah.
This is, of course, it's German Expressionism, which I absolutely adore, German Expressionism. And it's interesting to see it in a sci-fi because most of the German Expressionism that I personally have seen has been horror themed. So it's interesting seeing
Right. It's a different take on that.
Yeah, which I think is really interesting. There's a lot of focus on sort of Cubism and a lot of Art Deco inspiration in it, which is really cool. I mean, we see a lot more now of them doing that in sci-fi, but I mean, obviously, Metropolis was the first time that was really done with that style.
One of the things that I really like about that is how they used models and mist to create this futuristic looking city. That they use the close-ups of these models, but it looks pretty real, especially considering the technology they had available at the time. And then outside the set design for that, the costume design, especially for the leading lady, and then the robot design, I mean, it's awesome. It's had a precedent for sci-fi films from then on.
Well, the Machine Mensch, which is the robot's name if I'm correct,
I think so,
is such an incredible just depiction of that. And yet, like, every sci-fi film for so long, the robots looked so similar. I mean, even today, but especially for like 20-30 years after, like, they all looked like some version of the Machine Mensch. I really liked the sort of the religious themes that ran through it in a few different places. Maria teaching about the Tower of Babel to kind of illustrate the discrepancies between the wealthy and the poor in the town. And
I mean, if you think about it, we're looking at, and of course it didn't affect them as much, but still, that's around the time of the Great Depression. We're looking at that major separation of classes over there, especially in Germany post-World War I. They've got that issue also with economic disruption, which is one of the reasons why we had the rise of Nazis in World War II, but very relevant to the time, and using the biblical themes really connected it to a majority Christian country. Yeah,
well, it also has one of my favorite images just from sci-fi in general, which is, I think it's pronounced Fredar, silent film, but Fredar's dream with Maria as the Whore of Babylon riding on the many-headed dragon.
Oh, absolutely. That's
such an
phenomenal sequence.
Yeah. I also really like that they used the mirror effect in this film. I'm trying to pronounce his name. Eugen Schuften, the effects specialist on the film. We already touched on effects a little bit, but he used the mirror effect in that, which was then used by Hitchcock, one of his early films. Black
Friday?
No, it's from the 30s. It's one of those ones from the 30s. But yeah, I mean, and Hitchcock used it a few times, but the first time he used it was in that. Hitchcock used it a few times. And that became something that was really popular for sort of a quick effect for the 30s, 40s, 50s. The special effects artists on this came up with it.
Yeah. And speaking of influence from this, something that I think is pretty cool is looking at Godard's Alphaville, that same sort of miniature town design, especially in the opening sequence of Alphaville, very much in my mind, when I was watching Alphaville for the first time, I thought, oh, this is a lot like Metropolis and how they formed the city there with the way that they're forming in Alphaville with the small sets, using the fog to give it kind of a creepy futuristic atmosphere. I mean, really, you can see the influence of this film in so many different decades and countries and genres.
Absolutely in Alphaville, and Alphaville is one of my favorite sci-fi films. I think also you see it a lot in Blade Runner.
Yeah.
I actually think the style of the city in Blade Runner, every time because I saw Metropolis first, when I watched Blade Runner, the first thing I thought was, this is very similar to the take on the city from Metropolis.
Right.
Which I think was intentional. Knowing Ridley Scott, I'm sure that was intentional.
Right.
So yeah, well, and then you have another one for the next one.
Yeah, I have an honorable mention of The Lost World in 1925. I really enjoy the film. It's not going to be my top sci-fi film for the 20s, obviously, because we have Metropolis, but I do really enjoy the Silent Lost World film that came out at that time. I think it's a fun science fiction film and worth a watch if you have the time.
They remade that as well, right, in the 60s?
Not so much that film as readapting the same story, because they're all based on the...
Oh, the Arthur Conan Doyle?
Oh, Arthur Conan Doyle, yeah.
Yeah.
So for 1930s, there's a lot to mention. One of the big ones there, which I think Josh is going to touch on, is Things to Come. My personal favorite from the 1930s is the Flash Gordon serial that was released during that time. And Flash Gordon's kind of an interesting one because Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers were really big around that time. Buck Rogers actually came out in comic form earlier, and then Flash Gordon was created to kind of capitalize on that success. So they're very similar. Flash Gordon is one of my favorites of this too, and I chose Flash Gordon even though Buck Rogers was kind of the bigger deal in the 1930s, specifically because of the lasting impact it's had. One of those things that's impacted, which everybody knows, is Star Wars. If you know anything about Star Wars, you know that George Lucas actually originally wanted to do an updated version of Flash Gordon, but he couldn't get the rights, and so what happened then was he started pulling influence from there, pulling influence from Akira Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress and some other Japanese films, and kind of melded those all together to create Star Wars. But you see a lot of the things that are present in Flash Gordon in Star Wars. You see this space opera theme. I mean, they have a very similar style as far as that space opera and the grandeur. Right.
Upbeat
tone. The opening scroll that everybody knows from the beginning of Star Wars, I mean, that was taken directly from Flash Gordon. They opened the same way. Now, Flash Gordon, I believe it was supposed to be a newspaper, was kind of being scrolled up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, he took that directly from there, because that was one of the things he originally wanted to do. If you look at the soft wipes that Star Wars is so known for between the scenes, like the little whoop, or the... those are pulled from Flash Gordon. Those are something that's used there. And then there's actually in Flash Gordon a place called Cloud City, which is a floating city in the sky. And George Lucas's looks a little more refined, a little more futuristic, but again, that idea is pulled directly from there. And Cloud City, of course, doesn't come in until Empire Strikes Back, but it's just interesting to look at that. And even down to the Imperials versus the Rebels, they don't exactly use the same names in Flash Gordon, but very similar themes. And then the last place is just this idea of having a fairy tale where technology is taking the place of magic. Because you got the Force, it's kind of like magic, but it's not quite, right? It's mystical, but it's something that controls everybody. But instead of magic, you've got things like your blasters, your lightsabers, and things like that. So just the lasting impact of that, especially in the form of Star Wars, but I mean, outside of that, it's going to be hard to find somebody who doesn't know who Flash Gordon is, and there's a remake in the 1980s. I try not to remember that happened.
Oh, I love it. That's the perfect, like, middle of the night, I just want to watch something stupid and laugh at it. The 1980s one is great.
I mean, if you're into that, I can't get past it, having so much love for the original. I do love the theme song. Queen is great, but again, that's just something showing the impact of that, and I believe there's even a remake of the TV series
with the quarterback guy from Smallville play Flash Gordon. Yeah, it's terrible.
Okay.
He's like a motorcycle.
I saw the first episode, and that's about as far as it went. But and then I think you said on yours you were looking at Things to Come.
I'm looking at Things to Come and King Kong, and I don't have a ton about Things to Come just because I feel like you have to experience it, and I don't really want to give too much away.
Right.
So Things to Come was directed by William Cameron Menzies, and it was written actually by H.G. Wells, who wrote I'm going to call it a novella. It's kind of cheating to call it a novel. But basically, what I think is really interesting about it, and I think it's maybe the most cerebral sci-fi from the 30s, what's really interesting about it is they, instead of being sort of a linear plot, it's sort of like almost like a series of vignettes of just things happening and conversations going on, to kind of give you a feeling more than to stimulate your mind and give you a feeling more than to just kind of like tell you a story that's gonna like tug at your heartstrings.
Right. It's not so much chronological. It's like here's little bits of information. You're kind of piecing something together in your mind rather than being told everything.
Yeah, which is a very interesting to do, especially for back then, because we've now seen that sort of non-linear filmmaking a lot.
Absolutely.
And redone, but back in the in the 30s for things to come, that wasn't something that was being done a bunch.
It's something that pops into my mind as far as the non-linear is. It's a much newer film, The Fountain. The Fountain follows that same non-linear thing. Of course, they're very different types of films, but one of my favorite science fiction films, and it really uses that non-linear structure to tell a story, but you're kind of piecing everything together rather than having it told to you. It's one of those things that leaves an air of mystery about it.
Yeah, and I know that Cameron Crowe, one of my favorite like sort of indie drama directors, when he did Vanilla Sky, he was actually inspired by Things to Come, and there was one from the 80s that didn't find him as well, I don't know what it was, but he talked about in interviews that Things to Come was sort of that non-linear model,
right?
Something that he really wanted to mess around with, which is why Vanilla Sky is like his only like not just straight up like romance drama sort of film.
Right, and I think that when you use that technique and you use it well, it really adds to a film, like they did in Things to Come, like they did in Vanilla Sky, like they did in The Fountain.
And then my other one, which I think I have a little bit more to say about, just because I think it's maybe not as good as a sci-fi film, but certainly the most iconic and one of the most important films of all time, King Kong.
Yeah, and I love that film. I went back and forth on that. I feel it's more of a fantasy film, but definitely I bet you can make an argument for it being sci-fi.
I kind of agree with you, which is why I wanted to bring up Things to Come as well, just to kind of even the score. But King Kong, I think it really lives in that realm where it's sci-fi and fantasy kind of meeting in the middle, and so it's hard to place. And I almost thought, well, maybe it would be horror when we talk horror list, but it just felt, it wasn't meant to be scary, and so.
Right.
But I mean, first of all, this was the origin of I think one of the most important horror tropes of all time, which is the Scream Queen. I mean, Fay Wray, she's the first real Scream Queen.
If you think about the climactic scene at the top of the Empire State Building, I mean, even if you've never seen the 1933 King Kong, you know that sequence in one way or another. Like, that's just iconic.
Oh, absolutely. And it has a few of the most iconic as well. I mean, the shot in like the pit where he's fighting the dinosaur. Well, he fights the dinosaur and he's in the cave. He's fighting? Is the octopus he fights in the down in the pit?
Yeah, I think
so. Things like that. I mean, it has some of the most incredible. The cinematography in that film, especially for the time period, like that is some incredible cinematography.
Yeah. Definitely some masterful filmmaking.
I mean, the effects work is just incredible, and I think it also elevated the monster films that we had at the time, because it's, I think, a much more cinematic and well put together film. But most importantly, you care about Kong, which is something that I think you didn't have in monster films back then.
Right.
You care about Kong, and you are emotionally tied to him. But I think the most important thing about King Kong for me is that it inspired one of my personal film heroes, Ray Harryhausen. That's the film that Harryhausen saw and said, that's what I want to do, and that's what made him go into effects work, and he's one of my film heroes.
Harryhausen is a master when it comes to the claymation work, and even if the films themselves aren't great, they're worth watching just for his special effects. I think of the film 1 Million Years BC. It's not a wonderful film by any means. There's not a lot driving that film.
There's Raquel Welch in a bikini.
You've got Raquel Welch in the lead, which is good. And then you've got Ray Harryhausen's animation of all the different dinosaurs and creatures, and it makes it a very enjoyable film. And that goes with any film that he's made. And some of them, where he's worked on, they are very good films. Some of them, they're not so much. But I always find myself enjoying them just because of the technical work that went into creating all those animated parts and juxtaposing them with the live actors.
And he did all of that stuff by himself.
Yeah.
As well. But yeah, I mean, that's even to the extent that you could actually, the next decade, which I'll talk about in a minute, but he did Mighty Joe Young specifically because he loved King Kong so much, and he just wanted to kind of do that. That's what he wanted to do, and he was in his early 20s when he did that one.
I started the last one.
I'll start this one, and I'm going to be really similar to you in the last one. For 40s, I actually have Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe.
There we go.
So I will cave and say that the 30s one is probably technically the better of them.
I would say that.
But the 40s one is a more cinematic. It's a much less complex story. I think it's a much more visually impressive story. Yeah. And I also think in the 30s there was a lot for it to compete with, and in the 40s you had a lot of sort of cheesy, like monster sci-fi and that kind of stuff.
Right.
So when looking at like what was the best from the 40s, Flash Gordon just tends to be a little bit above a lot of the others that came out.
Yeah, and again, I think Buck Rogers, they did some in the 40s, but the Buck Rogers of the 40s just was not as good as the stuff in the 30s. Like, 30s was the heyday for Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I really liked the 40s one. I mean, Conquers the Universe, which was, of course, a serial. Both of these were serials.
Right.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, it had mostly the same creative crew, and Buster Crabbe was back to play Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
And I mean, can we just talk about there's almost no hero on film that's as iconic or as awesome as Buster Crabbe as Flash Gordon. Just
absolutely
so much fun to watch. And I think also it borrows a lot from the first serial. And so I think that does, in one hand, lessen it, and on the other, make it better, because it borrows a lot of story elements and sort of special effects elements from the first serial.
Yeah, it's kind of the same issue that you see with Star Wars Episode 7, which I love Star Wars Episode 7, but when you're watching as a standalone film, if it wasn't, I know it's excellent, but when you've seen Episode 4, you're like, alright, they're kind of just redoing the same thing. And so while it's a more visually impressive film than Episode 4 by today's standards, I might tend to argue with that just because of the technical acumen that went into making the first one. It's the lesser of the films because it's kind of rehashing that.
Oh, absolutely.
And I feel like this had the same issue with Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe as Episode 7 had compared to Episode 4. So it's still really good in its own right. It's just kind of like a simplified rehashing.
As a bonus, it's not as bad as the one from the 50s.
There is that.
The one from the 50s is a special animal. I'll let you touch on yours from the 30s.
Yeah, I think you mean
40s. I meant the 40s.
Yeah. So for the 1940s, I have King of the Rocket Man, which again is a serial. Something to mention about both these serials and a lot of the serials at the time is they did actually cut them into films after they released all 12 parts.
I don't like those.
So most of them are 10 to 12 parts. They cut them into films. Now, King of the Rocket Man is awesome. It has kind of a noir feel to it. For me, it's not exactly a noir film, but you have this really awesome feel. One with the bad guy, Dr. Volky. You never actually see him. You only see him in shadows and you hear his voice. So I think it's a really cool setup. Like, it creates a sense of mystery around who the bad guy is. But then you have Jeff King, this character in the story, and his friend Dr. Millard, and they kind of go into hiding when Dr. Vulcan's trying to take over the world. He's trying to conquer the Earth. And Dr. Millard gives him this sonic-powered jetpack, which I think looks awesome. Like, ever since I watched that as a kid, I was like, man, I want one of those. And I still haven't quite given up on my dream of getting a rocket pack, but
I don't think I've seen it since I was a kid.
I might have to let that one slide. And then he also gets a ray gun, and the ray gun you see in so much sci-fi. Even if it's just under a different name. You see the ray gun in Flash Gordon, like I mentioned, you see in Buck Rogers. You see a similar thing in Star Trek, in Star Wars. Like, it's
Battlestar Galactica.
Battlestar Galactica.
Especially the original Battlestar Galactica. You see this everywhere.
So he takes these in, the 12-part serials, him trying to stop Dr. Vulcan's plan while armed with his ray gun and his sonic-powered jetpack. And it's not like quality cinema, but boy is it fun. And as far as the 1940s, I didn't feel like there was a lot of really quality sci-fi. There was a lot just because it got really big in the 40s, so it was more like seriously just pumping things out to meet a quota.
It's almost like sort of like a lot of sci-fi now, where it's sort of that mass-produced like blockbuster feel because
right. Except it wasn't even blockbuster thing. It's just like shocking. I mean, you had the Invisible Man sequel, you had the Invisible Woman, and they're fun. But as far as we're going with favorites. What I love the best really is King of the Rocket Man. I recognize it's a serial. They did cut it into a film in '51, which actually changed the ending, and I'm not going to give anything away.
Serials count. They're close enough.
Yeah, a lot of people had some problems with the way they changed the ending. Some people loved it, some people hated it. I think it's pretty interesting. It's definitely a different take, because I'm going to watch a 12-part serial condensed out to a film. I like that it offers something new, that it's not just telling you the same story I already saw when I watched the 12-part and then cutting out good part. So I appreciate that. But yeah, 1940s, that was the only one I really had down because for me it was above and beyond everything else from that decade.
And I'll ask, just because it's been a really long time since I've seen it and I hardly remember it, as we talk about it, the sort of the noir sci-fi style, from what I recall, it's similar to Alphaville as far as sort of that like, here's all your sci-fi backdrop, your sci-fi storyline, but really it's kind of a character-driven noir.
Yeah, so it kind of starts out with a detective feel, and the one thing that does set it far apart from noir is there's no voiceover work or anything.
Okay.
At least to the best of my record, there's no voiceover in it. But as far as the way that it's shot, shot composition and things like that, it really does feel like it was inspired by the way that noir was put together. And I realized 1940s, and this is 1949, but noir's kind of coming into its own, so I can't say it's directly affected by that, but it just does kind of remind me of that, and noir is one of my favorite genres, so seeing something that reminds me of that is something that I enjoy.
Okay, and then for the 40s, I just want to quickly, very quickly, Mighty Joe Young. I just have to mention it because, as I said before, big Harryhausen fan. This was Harryhausen's first feature-length film, and actually, he didn't get credit for it. They gave it to, I gotta look at his name, Willis O'Brien, there we go, who did the effects from King Kong.
Right.
He was the supervisor for it, but he actually did pretty much none of the effects, and Harryhausen did all the effects, but they didn't even credit Harryhausen at the time.
Right.
For doing the effects. But Mighty Joe Young, I mean, I think, aside from just, it's very important in the fact that Harryhausen, who shaped so much of the blockbuster film, this was his first film. But also, I think it's really interesting to look at, because the same creative crew, even down to also featuring Robert Armstrong. I mean, it is the same creative crew from King Kong, but you see some very different story elements in this compared to King Kong, where King Kong sort of very much the theme is man messed with nature, that's bad.
Right.
And now monster attacked. Where Mighty Joe Young, and it deals a lot with greed, And Mighty Joe Young isn't about greed. It's about this girl who goes to the city with Joe in order to get money for her farm, to keep her farm afloat.
Yeah.
With this sort of earnest thing, and then you see sort of a scathing analysis of the court system and of sort of America's, like the corruption of man in not just America, but in general.
Right.
That sort of that corruption, which is sort of, I think, similar but a different theme than Kong.
And with Mighty Joe Young, that's another one where I might argue its classification as a science fiction film. To me, it's always been more of like a character-driven drama, but like definitely the Ray Harryhausen part is very important there. And I mean, again, the first major film he worked on, like that was his foot in the door, and it's a shame he didn't get credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, nobody even knew about it until he did an interview with, I think it was Tim Burton, and was talking about that.
Yeah.
And Tim Burton was like, well, I know you did like a little bit of work, and he was like, no, I did everything.
Yeah.
And it was that was like 2000. I want to say that was like, I could be wrong, but I remember seeing that in 2008 documentary with Tim Burton, and I think that was the first time he ever actually came out and said it.
That was probably archive footage, but
I mean, well, he died in 2013, and it was right before his death.
Man, I thought he died earlier.
No, he died in I want to say September of 2013.
Oh, because I always think of Harryhausen's in Monsters, Inc., and I always thought that was a tribute to him because he had died.
Oh, no, he was still alive.
All right, 1950s. I have a lot of honorable mentions. Josh might touch on those a bit. I thought honorable mentions, we'll just start there. Day the Earth Stood Still, War of the Worlds, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and The Blob are all great films from that time period. But the thing that really stood out, the movie that I think is the best and most influential science fiction film of the 1950s is going to have to be Gojira, also known as Godzilla here in the States. And
well, Godzilla's a different film, though.
God, yeah.
They cut in a white guy and changed the plot.
I mean, there is that minor detail. But yeah, Gojira is one of my absolute favorite science fiction films of all time. Not from a quality standpoint. I mean, it is a very well-made film, but it's just fun. And if you look at the cultural impact, I mean, it's had a widespread cultural impact outside Japan, as in the United States too. I think it's one of the biggest places affected by that. And the film itself spawned 27 direct sequels, and then they just had a reboot in Shin Godzilla. And then you had, of course, some of the American ones, Godzilla 1998. I like to pretend that didn't happen.
Oh, that movie.
It's bad.
The worm scientist. The why.
Again, I try to block it out, so please don't bring those memories back. Yeah, 98 was not good. But one of the sequels I do love, one of my favorite Godzilla films outside Gojira is Godzilla 2000. Phenomenal. There is the 2014 Godzilla reboot with Bryan Cranston and
Aaron Taylor Johnson, yeah.
Aaron Taylor Johnson. They're actually, with the reboot that they just did, the 28th Gojira film, is they're rebooting there, and then Toho is doing their reboot there, and then Legacy Entertainment who did the 2014 is continuing there, but they're sharing an existing universe. So it's kind of interesting what they're doing there. But yeah, I mean, it's got those, like I said, 27 sequels, the reboot in Shin Gojira. You've got the American films. I mean, you're hard-pressed to find anybody that doesn't know who Godzilla is. I can't think of a single person I know that doesn't know Godzilla in one form or another. And then you've also got the pop culture and American impact. You've got video games. I can think of 2 or 3 video games I used to play back on the GameCube.
Well, and they had the Hanna-Barbera cartoon as well.
They had the Hanna-Barbera cartoon. There's a couple of them, actually. There's one that was from the late 1000s, there's one from earlier, and the 1000 ones is more similar to the films, and then there's the earlier one where he lived in the sea, and then he'd come out and he'd help the characters fight.
Yeah, he was a little baby Gojira.
Yeah, and that was one of my favorite cartoons as a kid. Yeah, and then, again, the movie adaptations, but I thought the video games were good. Movie adaptations, I haven't seen the 2014 one yet. It's been on my watch list. I've heard mixed things.
It's
98 is terrible.
You'll probably like it, but yeah, it's one of those films
I know
where,
it's slowly paced.
So, minor spoiler, I guess, but basically the main actor that he's like, oh, he's in the entire film, dies like 5 minutes in. And then it's really slow. And so when it finally shows Godzilla, it's one of the best, like, creations of Godzilla put on film. It's not till the very end of the film, and it's frustrating that in that regard. But it's certainly better than a lot of the Godzilla films.
Well, and one thing that I do is just as far as the impact of Gojira is one film that really stands out to me. Something that's influenced by that is Cloverfield. Now I know it doesn't directly show the creature, but when I was watching Cloverfield for the first time, obviously they're very different films. But it's like I could definitely see where the influence was brought in there, especially at the end when it actually shows the monster in Cloverfield in those final sequences. You're like, wow, this is really. He's pulling a lot of inspiration from that. Again, very different films, but you can see that inspiration through there, and even in a lot of American feature films.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of creature features that have been inspired by that. And on Cloverfield, which I guess you know, they don't. Cloverfield's one of my favorite films. I grew up with that. When that came out, I was in elementary school. That was one of the first horror films I was allowed to watch, and so that has a special place in my heart. Drew Goddard, who actually worked on Buffy with Joss Whedon, and made Cabin in the Woods with Joss Whedon, he made Cloverfield.
Right.
He wrote it, and he specifically wrote it because he was watching a bunch of Toho films.
Yeah.
And so he was watching the old Godzilla films, and he was like, "What if we could do that with like updated graphics and kind of put a new twist on it?"
Right.
And that was why like a lot of people criticized the sort of found footage element of it, but he only did that because he felt like if he just did it straight up, it would be too similar.
Yeah, you don't want to have a
Godzilla.
carbon copy.
Yeah, and so that's in that regard, yeah. I mean, Godzilla is super impactful. I actually almost chose it. And the reason I didn't was because I knew that you would want to talk about it.
Yeah.
I have kind of two, but they're both going to be really quick. One is It Came From Beneath the Sea, the Ray Harryhausen.
Yeah.
Which is in terms of the actual quality of Harryhausen's films, because I mean, let's be fair, he did a lot of stuff, and a lot of it was in the 50s.
Right.
Where I think this falls is it's not the best of his films overall, but it is some of his best. It's sort of his best work on effects.
Absolutely.
The smoothness and the realisticness of the creature, the sea creature, and how it moves. I was blown away. I watched this one of the last ones I saw of his. I watched this one 4 or 5 years ago for the first time. And even then, I mean, I knew what the effects were, but I would forget watching the film and just be blown away by what was going on and have to like remember.
He really did a phenomenal job with the animation.
And the fact that he does it all himself, because he literally, I mean, he would sit in a room for 3 months and just animate that all himself. Which is incredible. It also has some of the least amount of stock footage of those films. Because a lot of those films, they used a lot of stock footage. So if you saw every Harryhausen film, which I think you've seen most of them, and I know I have, you can see like, oh, that shot of those 3 people running has been the last 4 Harryhausen films.
Right.
Because they were so low budget and they didn't have the... And there's not a bunch of that in It Came From Beneath the Sea. And the characters in this one are actually more interesting. The plot flows much more smoothly than a lot of those films. But really, primarily just because I think those effects are incredible. And I think that's a big part of what shaped sort of that, like, oh, we can do big effects. Let's do big effects sort of movement. And then also The War of the Worlds, which...
Great film.
Oh, so incredible. And I don't know if you're on the same page with me. Maybe it's just me mentally. But, so Gene Barry, that is 100% the modern day archetype of the action hero in sci-fi action, right? Like.
Oh, I mean, I feel like it definitely sets a precedent for it.
I mean, every time I see it, most of these, especially, obviously when they did the newer War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise, 100% he was trying to do an updated version of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of comparisons between the... I know people are very split on the Steven Spielberg one. I really liked it, but definitely what Tom Cruise was playing was very similar to what to Gene Barry in the original film.
Yeah, and I think so much of, especially back then, it's hard for me, I guess, to separate the cultural impact now from back then because I watch films from all over. Right. So I see that impact a lot, but I mean, the cultural impact, especially back then, like, after Gene Barry in this film, like, so many people were playing characters in these kinds of films that were so similar. And similar with the same kind of characters in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which kind of did the same thing. And kind of the same idea, where you have Gene Barry, the guy, and Anne Robinson, the girl, and the same thing in Invasion, you have a guy and a girl that are sort of, running around as this thing is happening. And that became sort of a very big trope. And I think these two films really pushed that. And I also think the design of the spaceships is just iconic and super cinematic. And yeah, I think it had a really big impact in just the development of the blockbuster film genre in general.
So War of the Worlds is 1953, and I don't know how many of the viewers know this, but 15 years earlier, 1938, Orson Welles did his radio broadcast, which had people terrified. Like, people thought that was something that was actually happening. It's like, I have to wonder, because if you look at War of the Worlds compared with a lot of the other science fiction films, like, at the very least, it seems like the budget was a lot higher. Like, the production value is much higher on that than it is on a lot of other things. The story is really fleshed out. And again, it has a book to draw from, but I have to wonder how much that success is helped by the popularity of that radio play after Orson Welles terrified everybody with it. Well, yeah. It was one of my favorite radio broadcasts of all time.
Oh, it's on my iPod.
Having heard that and watching the film, like, it really adds to it for me. Like, it makes it more fun, because I'm like, man, 15 years earlier, like, people actually thought this was happening. They heard this on the radio. They thought aliens were attacking. They're freaking out. Like, it's hilarious.
Well, there's a version of this film online somewhere. May or may not be legal. There's a version of this film online somewhere where they took the dialogue at the beginning, the like voiceover, explain what happened, and they removed it and they replaced it with the Orson Welles radio broadcast.
Really? I have not.
So the film starts with that, and then throughout the film, when it cuts to the radio, it cuts to Orson Welles doing his broadcast.
That's definitely one I'm going to have to try to watch.
Which is absolutely hilarious. And it actually flows really well. But I mean, this was a better restored film in general. Like, it was very well kept up. It was really successful, and a lot of money went into this.
Especially even comparing to the other H.G. Wells adaptations, definitely a higher production value.
Yeah.
And H.G. Wells was pretty famous, but like, this one definitely is a step up from the other movie adaptations of his books that they did.
Even, I mean, the two bigger ones, and I could be wrong on the release date for the one, because I don't remember when Time Machine came out, the original Time Machine.
Yeah, that was... I believe that was the 30s.
Yeah, okay, I was going to say, I think it was...
I can't remember the exact date.
But, that had, at the time, a decent-sized budget, but still smaller than this.
Right.
And then...
1960.
Okay. I was thinking that it was, so that got a bigger budget, and I gotta wonder if that had a bigger budget because of War of the Worlds, though it still wasn't as big a budget as this. And then I always think of Invisible Man, which is, horror, of course, and one of my favorite horror films. That was a really low-budget film, especially compared to the other monster films of the time. Yeah. And that's, that's, to me, crazy, because H.G. Wells is one of the most, prolific science fiction writers of all time. It's so huge. But
I mean, to their credit, it did get a budget increase in the 1940s when they did the sequel.
Yeah.
And then they did the prequel, Invisible Woman, which was kind of setting up how that whole thing happened and changing off that. I think that was kind of one. I mean, that other film was made 15 years before, 20 years before War of the Worlds. So I think building up that name, just going from book to film, was something. Yeah. Trying to get people invest in we can actually do this, we can do this well.
Well, and it's interesting because you can see, which was actually one of my ones that was an honorable mention for the same decade, came out later than this, I believe. But Earth vs. Flying Saucers, which is Harryhausen. Yeah. Where literally the reason it exists is Harryhausen said, "I want to do War of the Worlds," and then somebody beat him to it. Right. So he just all right, and he just found a film studio that wanted to do something similar to War of the Worlds to capitalize on the popularity. And actually, the flying saucers that Harryhausen made in Earth vs. Flying Saucers are the more iconic look for them. Yeah. I don't like it as much, but
I think really, though, no matter who you ask, we can all agree the best looking flying saucers are in Plane 9 from Outer Space, the greatest science fiction film ever made.
Absolutely. I'm sad we didn't get to talk about that one more. It's just such a fantastic film.
Phenomenal film.
Ed Wood. If you don't know Ed Wood, there's this really great Tim Burton movie that kind of depicts his lifetime. Just one of the best directors of all time. I mean, people think Hitchcock is good.
Talk about Hitchcock. We got to go to Ed Wood.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share, and have a great day.
Or don't. I don't care.